All right, so this section of notes, guys, we're going to take a little bit of a look at two basic concepts, kind of levels of organization, specifically for a multicellular organism, and we're also going to take a look at necessary life functions, so things that are you need to have in place for an organism to survive. So a lot of this is going to seem pretty familiar if you remember back to bio, or if you're currently taking AP bio. Some of this stuff kind of falls into the same place. So we'll try to go through this as quickly as we can and as painless as we can. So the first slide you're going to see here shows those basic levels of organization for that multicellular organism, from simplest, the number one there, from chemical level, to all the way to the most complex, number 6 at the organism level. So we'll just walk through these real quick. So chemical level can be arranged from both atoms as well as chemical compounds. So atoms would be single elements found on the periodic table. For living things, those are big ones like carbohydrates, sorry, not carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, a little bit of phosphorus. Those are the big ones we see there. For molecules, those would be things like carbon dioxide, oxygen, water, ATP, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. Those would be things we find in the molecule level. From there, we really get into kind of looking at the basic building blocks for all things, which is the cellular level. So they're showing us a basic smooth muscle cell there. That's pretty characterized by the fact that it has this kind of fat middle, kind of skinny ends. Most textbooks will tell you that the smooth muscle cell looks like a spindle. So if you think of like the spindles that are on a banister on a set of stairs, they look sort of the same. They've got this thin edges, a little bit fatter in the middle, and they've got one nucleus. They also don't have any striations. That's one of the reasons why we call them smooth muscle. From muscle cells, we can then put several of those cells together and get a tissue of muscle. All right, so this is a basic smooth muscle tissue that you see in the next picture here. So now we have several smooth muscle cells put together performing essentially the same function. Now, smooth muscle is usually found in a lot of our large hollow organs as well as our blood vessels. So if you take several layers of this tissue and put it together, you can get a organ. All right, so that's our next level there, number 4. Organs obviously then are just comprised of several different layers of tissue. They're all trying to perform a similar function. In the case of the blood vessel here, we're trying to pump blood or move blood essentially around the body. So there are 3 layers here. We've got connective tissue on the outside. We have smooth muscle tissue there in the center, kind of as a sandwich. And then the very middle layer of tissue, or the very inside layer of tissue, is the epithelial tissue. All right. From there, we can take several organs and put them together so we can get an organ system. Right? You're looking at the cardiovascular system here. So now we have the heart, blood vessels leading away from the heart, so arteries, blood vessels leading back to the heart, so our veins, and then we've got a lot of these peripheral systems as well as capillaries. All right. The final step on that is then the organism level. All right. So now we take several of those systems and put them together, and we obviously then get a full-fledged human at this case. Okay. Um, just to back up real quick, so questions on this that you might see on the exam, you might see a question where they're going to ask you to put these steps in order. So just know from simple to complex, they might go the other way. All right, those are basic questions you might see on the assessment, or they might simply just give you a definition of one or the other, and then you'll have to try to put that definition with the actual level. So know that like cells are just made up of molecules or chemicals or atoms. Tissues are made up of cells, organs are made up of tissues, organ systems are made up of organs, and then organisms are made up of organ systems. Okay. All right. From there, we're going to move into survival needs. So there are some basic survival needs that organisms have to continue to live. One of those is the ability to get nutrients. So nutrients have to be coming in to do a couple different things. Number 1, supply energy. Right. And number 2, they have to be able to supply the basic building blocks to rebuild tissue. Those basic nutrients, especially for us as living things, are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, any kind of vitamin, and as well as minerals. So vitamins would be things like vitamin B12, vitamin A, vitamin B. Okay. Minerals would be things like calcium, phosphorus, amino acids. All of those basic things kind of need to be able to come in so that we can make sure we have enough nutrients. Number 2 here talks about oxygen. We're an aerobic organism, so we require oxygen to be able to break down and do our chemical reactions. Without oxygen, we can't do that. So oxygen is one of those basic survival needs. Water is another one. So you've probably heard the old adage that most humans are about 70 to 75% water. Well, it really depends. It could be anywhere from 60 to 80% of your body weight, actually. Right? That water provides the medium not only for chemical reactions, but it also helps stabilize the next one here in line, which is body temperature. All right. Our body temperature would like to stay somewhere between 90 or about right around 98.6 degrees, but you can fluctuate. So there are people out there who have body temperatures that are closer to 97 or sometimes 96, and there are people out there with body temperatures above 98.6. You could be up to 99, and then it's not unheard of to see some people closer to 100 degrees. All right, but normally it should be pretty close to about 98.6 degrees, but it just depends on what your normal body temperature is. The next one in line here is atmospheric pressure. So atmospheric pressure plays a huge role specifically in our breathing. Our thoracic cavity is a sealed cavity. It's that way so that our lungs can actually inflate and deflate appropriately. So the only way that we can do that is to keep it sealed and keep the thoracic cavity under negative pressure. So when you breathe in, you increase the space in that cavity, or essentially increase the volume of that cavity, and air from the outside will simply rush into your lungs to fill that space. When you breathe out, the opposite happens. So now your diaphragm forces up, lessens that space or decreases our space inside of there, and now the air will be forced out of our lungs. That's why if we go up in altitude, the atmospheric pressure is lower, so that's why it's harder for us to breathe. It's also harder for us to breathe if we were to go down below, like the ocean, and be under pressure now, right? So air would actually not want to push into our lungs because that much more pressure is forced down on top of us, okay? All right. Other basic necessary life functions that we see are run by a lot of our organ systems of our body. So maintaining of boundaries. This is really done by our skin, so our integumentary system. It's for our first line of defense, and if we have a nice intact skin, we normally don't run the risk of any kind of infections. When you start to see breakdowns in that boundary is when you usually start to see huge infections. Movement is another one. So movement specifically 2 types: locomotion, which is movement from A to B, as well as movement of substances. So this is pushing things through our bloodstream, also pushing things through our digestive system. We have to be able to move those substances. Responsiveness is another one. This is the main organ system responsible for responsiveness, obviously, then is our nervous system. All right. It has the ability to sense changes that happen not only in our body, but outside of our body, and then try to react to those. All right. So if say our blood pressure drops, okay, our body is able to sense that and immediately cause our heart rate to increase. Increasing heart rate will increase blood volume. If blood pressure drops and increasing heart rate's not enough, we can pull water out of our digestive system and now make our blood either thicker or thinner, depending on what we need, and try to adjust our blood pressure. Digestion is one of the last ones. So this is really breaking down and kind of taking those nutrients we just talked about a few minutes ago and delivering them to parts of the body. But those are huge things that we need to kind of be able to do. Metabolism is another part of that, as well as digestion. So this is breaking down this is the chemical reactions in our body. All right. So these are doing 2 things for us: not only producing energy, specifically ATP for us, so that our cells can have enough energy to function, but also producing the necessary things that will help make body structures for us. So we constantly are breaking down tissue, and we have to be able to replace that. So our metabolism helps break down those basic nutrients that we bring into our body into their base elements so that we can use them to remake tissue. The last one of these is excretion on this page. So excretion is getting rid of those wastes, not only solid waste from the digestive system, but also metabolic waste from chemical reactions, right? Every time we do chemical reactions, there's a byproduct. It's carbon dioxide, mostly. So we have to be able to get rid of that carbon dioxide. A couple of the last ones here is reproduction. This one is obviously not necessary for an individual to survive, but it's obviously a necessity for the species to survive. All right. And then the last one is growth. We have to be able to grow Growing leads to increasing in size of cells as well as number of cells, but it also allows us to help replace those cells in our body that are breaking down. You're going to see a lot of these necessary life functions that we just talked about as we go through the semester. When we talk about certain units, these usually are where we see what we call homeostatic imbalances. If there's a problem with one of these necessary life functions, it happens in those systems, and then it shows up as those things I just said, which are called homeostatic imbalances, or essentially disease processes. Okay. All right. So we're gonna finish this lecture up right here. We'll pick back up tomorrow, or the next set of notes. We'll pick up back up with looking at homeostasis itself and the basic feedback mechanisms that work from those. Okay.